and saying it should have taken him 4 hours. It seems to have taken Dr. Teo a lot shorter than that. He did say, though, that he thought he was a very skilled surgeon. So that's interesting as well. And for everybody who's in the category of a self-funded retiree, they're listening to this whole debate about interest rates with a curious sense because, of course, in a way, well, not even in a way, absolutely, interest rates going up is good news if you're a self-funded retiree who's got money in the bank and you're relying on that deposit income. One of the frustrations is you can see the pain, maybe even of younger members of your own family with the mortgage rates, but they're not being similarly high with your deposit rates. The ACCC today has launched an inquiry into why there's this big gap between the rates for mortgages, which seem to go up, within a couple of hours of the Reserve Bank announcing a change, and those for poor old depositors.
I can't imagine why. Why would there be a gap? It's very curious,
I looked them up today,
it?
actually. These are just some of the figures. This is one of the big banks. If you put your money in, this is $10,000. I assumed you had $10,000, Josh.
Sure.
Manny, you're standing.
Yeah.
So I put $10,000 into the CanStar computer, and you can get 2.7 for a year, 11 months actually, 2.7 as a depositor. If you take out a home loan, 6%.
I've got some good news for you. Joel Gibson, the author of Kill Bills, was on the show earlier today, and he told us that that you can get 4.8% is the best offering at the moment on a savings account. So you actually if you shop around,
I did see that.
You can get in excess of 4.5% now.
That's right, and some of the smaller operators are operating at 4.7. But the big banks, that's the sort of gap.
I mean it's ridiculous.
6%.
It's absolutely ridiculous. But we all know they do this. We know that when interest rates go up, they pass it along immediately. When interest rates go down, they drag their feet. We know there's this ridiculous spread between interest rates. They are profit-making.
But can the ACCC do something about it?
Watch this space. You'll find out on
You
on
sound
Drive.
as if you think there's nothing to be done.
We'll see.
Maybe you're
We'll
right.
see. Perhaps I'm too cynical. Richard Glover up after the news headlines. Have a great afternoon and evening. I'll see you tomorrow.
Mornings with Sarah McDonald. Unmissable radio.
Cost of living, obviously, a huge issue.
The things that matter to you.
So many apartments are empty.
If you've amassed a fortune in criminal funds, it's more of a hassle than anything.
Important topics.
Tolls would be a tiny bit more palatable if there were no potholes. We didn't have to queue at a hospital.
Local issues.
The Great West Walk up to the Blue Mountains, it's already going through all these villages. If we just promoted those existing walks.
Mornings with Sarah McDonald from 8:30 on ABC Radio Sydney.
Good afternoon. Adam Story with ABC News. The Governor of the Reserve Bank insists lifting interest rates remains the best tool to tackle surging inflation. Philip Lowe has appeared before a Senate hearing in Canberra amid ongoing criticism of the RBA's decision to lift the official cash rate 9 times in recent months. The steep rise in interest rates has boosted the Commonwealth Bank's bottom line. Australia's biggest home lender saw after-profit tax for the first half jump by 10% to $5.2 billion. Unions New South Wales has praised the High Court for throwing out a spending cap on third parties in state elections. Legislation introduced by the government prevented third-party campaigners from working together, along with a spending cap of $20,000. The Premier has stopped short of ruling out further privatisations to fund a plan to raise the dam wall of Sydney's Warragamba. The state government last year pledged to raise the wall by 14 metres in order to future-proof Western Sydney from major flood events. The Defence Minister, Richard Marles, says a review into laws governing retired military personnel has recommended tighter policies and additional laws to ensure national secrets are protected. Last year, the Minister urgently asked his department to investigate reports Australians were approached to help train Chinese military. Desperately needed aid has started to flow from Turkey into rebel-held northwest Syria 8 days after the devastating earthquakes. Syria says there will be no discrimination between government and rebel-held zones when it comes to distributing the aid. At least 3 people are now known to have died after the Cyclone Gabrielle lashed New Zealand's North Island. 2 people died overnight, and this morning the body of a missing firefighter was recovered. And Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, is reportedly planning to return to the country next month to lead the opposition. The Wall Street Journal says he's also pledged to defend himself against accusations that he instigated violent riots last month. Partly cloudy in Sydney this afternoon, sunny tomorrow 28, sunny on Friday, a top of 30. More news at 4.
You're listening to Drive with Richard Glover
on ABC Radio Sydney.
G'day, Richard Glover with you on ABC Radio Sydney. Hope you're well. Today, Lowe no longer. Philip Lowe defends the Reserve's interest rate rises and says there may be more to come. Also today, online gambling has traditionally sold itself as a man's world. But now it's targeting new female customers. So what's the pitch and will it work? And on Midweek Conf, online everywhere. Let's check the traffic.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
And Jeff Wallace is here from the Australian Traffic Network. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Richard. On camera, multi-vehicle crash on the M4. It's at Granville, adjacent to the Church Street on-ramp. It's heading up towards Mays Hill. We've got delays back towards Homebush, past Centenary Drive into Auburn. North Sydney, a breaking out truck on the freeway. He's approaching Falcon Street, lane 2. Delays behind him. Also, waterfall emergency work affecting southbound the Princess Highway at Cooraban Street. I'm Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network.
Jeff, thank you very much. Now, I wonder if you, like me, read the advice column, the financial advice column in Wednesday's Sydney Morning Herald. It fascinates me, frankly, not because I've got any great questions of my own to ask, but people ask really quite normal questions about their pension and superannuation and selling a house and buying a house and how what the law is. And the columnist is a really, terrific writer. It's very clearly spelt out, but it's so complicated. And the rules, I feel I'm relatively well informed. I certainly been reading this column for years, and yet I find myself entirely baffled by these things all the time, whereby if you sell this item in that order and you reverse the order and you do it this way around, you'll be 20% off or 20% worse off. And if you remove your you remove your money from the one I read the other day, if you remove, I think I got this right, if you remove your money from superannuation a couple of days before you drop dead, there's no tax on it. But if you leave it in superannuation, the government gets 15%. So he's saying, this guy's writing and saying, my wife's a bit unwell. Get in quick. Get her to take her money. Oh, God. And I think all the time, I never knew that rule. I never knew this rule. It's so complicated. And then you think to yourself, well, I'm not ready for retirement yet, but I think to myself, well, when I retire, I'm obviously going to have to get a financial advisor to tell me how this all operates and what I should do, and should I get a part pension, or should I get a whatever they call it? You get I think it's an annuity off your super, or should you take it as a lump sum? And I just don't know. But then I look into getting a financial advisor, and it seems that they're hugely expensive, and also you keep on reading stories in the paper about the scandals involving financial advisors, so you think, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I should try to do it myself. And then you read the next column the next week and you realise it's too complicated. Is there a better way? Peter Martin is a visiting fellow at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University. He's been writing in the conversation about the dire state of financial advice and the availability of financial advisors in this country. And he joins us here on Drive. Peter, good afternoon.
G'day.
It's so complicated.
And it shouldn't be. That's the first thing to say. It is a disgrace that we ask people when they're approaching 65, whatever the age is, who may not be numerate, and there's no crime in not being numerate, right? When we ask them to make really complicated decisions, we can leave that to one side, but that we're all in this situation is a disgrace, and we should have designed systems so that, well, like you said, so we don't have that complexity.
It does seem as if there are so many sort of rules and sub-rules, and, it's just we've created a bafflingly complex system that requires really up-to-date advisors to navigate it at all.
Yeah, someone to hold your hand. Now, it used to appear to be good, Richard. It used to be that people would hold your hand for free. You didn't have to pay them a cent. You go and see these financial advisors that steer your money into certain accounts, do that for you, check in on you if you're lucky. Certainly they'd charge you each year for checking in on you. Oh, no, not in cash, never pay them. But they would, I can mention the name of a fund just because it's gone out of business, but they might put you into BT, right?
Mm-hmm.
And BT would pay them, say, 0.5% of your sum each year. And bear in mind, not only does that accumulate, but because your sum grows each year, it ends up being an awful lot of money for a simple visit that cost you nothing. And they used to steer people not all of them, but, well, let's put it this way. They wouldn't steer you into things that didn't pay them a commission.
Okay.
That's how it used to be, and that was wrong.
Very self-interested. So that's why we said, okay, well, and then, of course, there was the Royal Commission, which revealed all terrible practices such as charging dead people for advice and all that sort of stuff. So then we decided, okay, let's change the financial advice system and bring in a law that you can't do it on commission like that model. You've got to have a fee, pay a fee, and actually there's quite a lot of paperwork to make sure you're acting in the client's interests and not in your own. Now, the problem about that, and a lot of people cheered that on, I think including people like you.
I cheered it on.
Yeah, it's created this incredible reduction in the number of financial advisors, and the few that are left are charging a mozza.
Yeah, and by the way, there are some of them you can't get in to see if you've only got $1 million, like $2 million is the minimum. So what happened is all of these people, and, a lot of them didn't mean badly, right? A lot of them really helped people, albeit being paid through commission, left the industry because they put in all of these education requirements. Good thing, right? They said you can't receive kickbacks if you're a financial advisor. You'll have to charge up front. You can receive kickbacks still if you're a mortgage broker or you sell insurance. But financial advisors can no longer get them. And the paperwork, Richard, have you ever used a computer, signed up for an app and had to click agree? Well, it's worse than that, right? No one reads it. So what has happened, and the previous government commissioned a report on this from Michelle Levy, lawyer, and this government has now released the report, is that we now have half as many financial advisors in a country of, 26 million? We have 16,000 financial advisors. We used to have double that, 28,000. They won't see people. The typical fee, according to her report last year, $3,700. And while that may actually be less than we had to pay when the money was taken out invisibly and shoveled towards them, in kickbacks, while that might be less, it's not money a lot of people have. So her report is of the view, and she has persuaded me. It's said to be a mark of maturity to admit you were wrong. Okay, I was wrong. I was supporting the idea that they have to act in the, quote, best interests of the client. What she's arguing is that, and that, by the way, that throws out people from banks were told to not give advice. Super funds can't give advice, and they could if they went through all the rigmarole, but they don't. What she's proposing is that employees of banks, employees of super funds, be able to offer advice. Sure, you'll know, in the same way as when someone sells you a fridge in a showroom, they're being paid by the, they get money from it. But
or Peter, that shirt they say makes you look handsome.
Yeah, it's amazing, actually. I get a lot of admirers when I go shopping. So, and they're being paid to do it. So, but she says, and it's a subtle idea, and it's not, sort of an idea that I supported before. I was saying, no, best interest of the client, full stop. She's saying that's too expensive, too difficult to look at a client's situation every time. People should merely have to, and it should be enforced in the law, employees of banks, employees of super funds should merely be required to offer you good advice. And you can tell what bad advice is. I mean, it's really bad to tell you to take out an insurance policy if you don't have any money to do it or whatever. But that we should be able to get simple advice in the same way as the person who sells me clothes doesn't assess my whole wardrobe, doesn't assess my whole love life. She just says, you look nice in that, and it's probably better than this.
And so what that means is that good advice does not need to be comprehensive. No. You can just be advising Peter about whether it's better to put the money in super or his mortgage. You don't have to make it a lifetime plan.
Yes, and she calls it good advice. That would be the legal word, and that has a legal meaning already. But what it would really mean is not bad advice, not demonstrably, provably bad. You could take someone to court, or the authorities would take someone to court if a financial advisor, told you to buy a house, withdraw all of your savings when you couldn't afford the mortgage payments. That would be bad advice. But that no longer would financial advisors would still have to give perfect advice, but there'd be a whole class of other people who could help people out. And right now, we've got nearly everyone, most Australians, are completely in the dark. I'm forming the view that that's worse than not having perfect
And so
advice.
under this new definition, super funds and banks and so forth would be able to give limited good advice. She gave quite an emotional example from her own life, didn't she, Michelle?
Yes.
Michelle Levy, the Quality of Advice reviewer. She says she's got a daughter with a disability, she says, who does not know the difference between $10 and $10,000, and yet she's got a bank account. She wants her disabled daughter, to be able to get a bit of a helping hand from the bank to understand her finances, which at the moment is not really available.
That's right. A bank teller has to say, well, look, I'm sorry, I can't comment on that. Otherwise, they're in trouble because they're not licensed and they haven't done a complete assessment. And her daughter actually, she said, has 3 bank accounts, one labelled fun, one labelled essential, one labelled something else, which she said in parentheses is a pretty good life. But her daughter doesn't know the meaning of money. As she said, her daughter doesn't know the difference between $10 and $1,000. And that was, look, I don't like being persuaded that I'm wrong. I've pushed very hard for this for 25 years for no conflict of interest. And clearly someone who works in a bank has a conflict of interest. I've pushed very hard for no conflict of interest, and I've pushed very hard for best interests. And I can now see that sort of good enough is a lot better than no advice at all. So I have today publicly changed my mind. And by the way, I didn't change my mind until I'd read her full report.
Michelle Levy.
The government now has to decide whether it will change its mind. And Stephen Jones, the Assistant Treasurer, will have a consultation process.
Okay, but I mean, by the sound of things, they've got to do something. They're just not anywhere near as many financial advisors available as the Australian population needs, given the complexity of the law. Peter Martin is here, visiting fellow at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University. Just about that, the complexity of the law, the fact why unless you're trying to do something complicated, why should you need financial advice? Most people just want to, earn some money, pay their taxes, have some investments, hopefully, retire either with the help of the government or on your own. That's what we want. And yet it's so complicated. It's so complex. This is from Mary. Your conversation about retirement and money is spot on. I'm a well-educated, reasonably intelligent woman who feels totally overwhelmed by the complexities of my very basic finances, super and the pension. Penny from Willoughby agrees. It's impenetrable. I've worked as a lawyer in banking and funds management for 30 years. It's never been more confusing, with only the wealthy able to afford advice. It's time to start again. Perhaps just give everyone the aged care pension and let our progressive tax system sort out the rest. Is there any move on to try to reduce the complexity of it? The fact that the most simple question to, I think he's called Noel Whittaker, isn't he, in the Herald? The most simple question to Noel Whittaker gets them, and well written, and I'm not criticising him, but the most complex and baffling advice.
If we were starting again, we probably wouldn't have introduced superannuation. I say that because the concessions for super cost something approaching what the pension is now. So we could afford to give people a larger pension. That would remove a whole lot of rules you needed to worry about. Everyone would get the pension. Kerry Packer, well, he won't get the pension, but his son will get the pension. Not. Of course, they'll save more because they'd want more than the pension. But everyone would get something. It would be simple. Unfortunately, we're not starting from there. And every time they sort of you tweak a rule and you introduce an unintended concept, and that's why we need financial advisors. I can't see anyone undoing super as we have it.
But in the meantime, at least let your superannuation fund give you some good advice, and maybe even your bank teller give you some Good
Oh,
advice.
by the way, Richard,
Yep.
there is one thing to do, aside from there's an advice line. Each year now with your tax return, the ATO through MyGov reports on the performance of your super fund and recommends another one you can go to if yours is poorly performing, and it's one click. That's only come in a year ago, and that's the sort of thing we need.
All right.
You can just change with one click, like changing a mobile phone. You don't even need to talk to your old fund.
All right, a bit more simplicity, please. But in the meantime, yes, the government will now consider this report of Michelle Levy's quality of advice review. But yeah, according to Peter Martin, it's pretty compelling that we've got to do something to ease up the number of people that can give us financial advice, given the complexity of the system. Hey, Peter, thanks so much.
Great pleasure.
There's Peter Martin from the ANU referring to Michelle Levy's Quality of Advice review, which is online and, as he says, makes pretty compelling reading. 1300 222 702 is the number. On the text 0467 922 702.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
Quickly check the traffic and then we might go over to New Zealand where the death toll from that terrible cyclone is growing. We now have 4 people confirmed to have died in the Cyclone Gabrielle disaster. North Sydney, Warringah Freeway approaching Falcon Street, a truck breakdown there. 1 of 6 northbound lanes closed. It's lane 2. If you're in Greystanes, the M4 motorway just below the Cumberland Highway overpass. They've cleared the site, but still multiple vehicles involved in a crash westbound. And finally in Clyde, the M4 motorway just past Church Street on-ramp. 3 vehicles involved in a crash there with significant delays westbound. That's the latest here on Drive.
You're with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
Well, New Zealand's Prime Minister has declared a state of emergency after a weather event not seen, quote, in a generation. 4 people are confirmed to have died in the Cyclone Gabrielle disaster now, with extensive damage in coastal communities on the far north and east coast of the North Island. Authorities estimate more than 10,000 people have been displaced. There have been hundreds of rescues as well. Sarah Robson is from the Detail News podcast on Radio New Zealand and joins us here on Drive. Sarah, good afternoon.
Kia ora.
We have got this mounting death toll, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely tragic news. The latest figures that the Prime Minister Chris Hipkins has just mentioned in a briefing. There have now been 4 confirmed deaths, including the death of a child in the Hawke's Bay region who was swept away by rising floodwaters yesterday afternoon. Now, there are still several people who are missing for whom the police have very grave concerns. So there is a very real possibility that that death toll could rise. Now, at the moment, the police say that they have got 1,400 people on a list of people who are uncontactable at this stage. Now, about 1,100 people have been located and found, so there could be some double-ups between those 2 lists, but certainly with communications into Hawke's Bay and Gisborne on the east coast of the North Island, cell phone coverage is still extremely hard to come by. Internet, forget it. I saw a message from one friend in Hawke's Bay. She managed to get some Wi-Fi near Napier's airport. She couldn't read messages, but she could get something out to say she and her family were safe. So there are a lot of anxious people just desperately trying to get in touch with people in those extremely hard-hit areas who just simply have not been able to get through. We also just heard just recently on RNZ's Checkpoint program this horrific story of this couple who were house sitting a place in Esk Valley, just north of Napier. It's a very significant wine region, and the house was completely inundated, covered the entire roof. The 2 people who were house sitting managed to get up into the ceiling cavity, and while one of them has been able to be rescued, his partner was swept away in the floodwaters and she has not yet been found. There are just so many tragic stories coming out, and more to probably come out in the next few days as we really begin to get a sense of just how massive Cyclone Gabrielle has been.
You mentioned the child's death in Hawke's Bay and the difficulties of communication in Hawke's Bay. Does that seem to be the epicentre of it, if that's the right word?
Gisborne and Hawke's Bay are certainly the epicentre and the hardest hit areas. over the last couple of days, the rivers in those regions have just risen to levels that no one has ever really seen before. The comparison that has been made throughout this disaster is to Cyclone Bowler back in 1988. Now, this was actually before I was born, so I unfortunately have no kind of first-hand sort of knowledge of it, but you are hearing accounts from people who were around these kind of quite provincial, rural areas of New Zealand who are saying this is worse than Bowler, or this is as bad as it was during Cyclone Bowler. And that's where you get Chris Hipkins' comment, this is a once-in-a-generation kind of storm, certainly the most severe weather event of this century. So what we've had today, as some communications have been re-established, we've got the Defence Force going into both Hawke's Bay and Gisborne. Now, there are some towns that are completely cut off. They have got dwindling supplies of food, their water supplies have been cut off, and so far some of their communications have only been via satellite phone. Now, because of the weather, getting helicopters and aircraft into some of these areas has been pretty dicey. But the small town of Wairoa, which is home to about 8,000 people, it's not too far north of Napier, they're expecting to be cut off from Napier for months because the road is in just completely terrible shape. They have been able to get some supplies into there today, food, water, medicine, and they're actually bottled water as well. And they actually have been able to set up a barbecue in town to help feed, the thousands of people in that town who are facing, they've got no power, no cell communications, and in a pretty dire situation.
And that presumably is an extreme example with the road cut off for months of something which at some level is going to be felt in so much of the country, just roads cut and being taking weeks or months to be rebuilt.
Oh, that's exactly right. Well, we've had a horrendous summer of storms. Now, the Coromandel, which is further north of Gisborne, it's one of the tourism jewels of New Zealand. They have been hammered for the last 5 weeks by storm after storm after storm. Now, they have been cut off time and time again. The state highways are an absolute mess, just dropouts, slips. Again, communities isolated. And while some of these areas are used to these sorts of weather events, Cyclone Gabrielle is at a completely different scale. There are bridges between sort of two cities, Napier and Hastings. All of them have been taken out. Further north along the east coast, north of Gisborne, that road, plenty of slips. Those communities are fairly isolated and used to being cut off. But again, this is a completely different scale of situation, and there are going to be some huge rebuilds needed once this initial kind of urgent response phase, once we get through the next few days here.
Obviously, the rebuild is to come, but in terms of current weather, things are calmer now, aren't they?
Yeah, there has actually been a break in the weather. Now, I'm based in Auckland. Now, Auckland has also been hit pretty hard over the last few weeks with some record flooding at the end of January, and then another couple of storms sweeping in. Now, when I got up this morning, I was actually quite relieved to see some blue sky out there. So the weather has settled down. The weather has also settled down a wee bit in the Gisborne and Hawke's Bay regions. Now, everyone is on high alert for any sign of rain. Now, many of these rivers are actually still running pretty high, so it wouldn't take that much more rain for it to become a fairly dangerous or dicey situation again. So authorities are certainly keeping a very close eye on that. But, there is some relief, particularly in Auckland, where there is also a massive cleanup job happening over on the west coast. Landslides have, again, isolated coastal communities. They've got no power, no supplies, no way in or out. This brief reprieve from the weather is good to see, but, everyone is definitely still just on edge.
Yeah. Well, we know you really felt for us during the fires and floods, and we are really feeling for you during this, just as we did during Christchurch. But natural disasters are such a terrible thing, but I'm sure the resilience of the New Zealand people will show you through. Hey, Sarah, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you so much.
So Sarah Robson from the Detailed News podcast from Radio New Zealand with a very vivid portrait of what's happening on the other side of the ditch. Lots coming up, including gambling's new audience. They're targeting now the female gambler. More on that in a second. It's 4 o'clock.
Afternoon, Adam Story with ABC News. A disciplinary hearing has heard that the rationale behind one of Dr. Charlie Teo's controversial brain surgeries was nonsense. Isabel Rowe reports.
Sydney neurosurgeon Charlie Teo is fronting a professional standards committee over complaints he should not have operated on 2 brain tumour patients in 2018 and 2019. Dr. Teo allegedly told one woman she had a 5% chance of death from surgery, but another neurosurgeon called as a witness says that was falsely low and there was no benefit from such a surgery. Another surgeon said the rationale for operating was nonsense. Dr. Teo maintains he has many grateful patients. He's fighting to have restrictions on his medical licence removed.
2 people are missing in a mine incident in northwestern Queensland. Emergency services are on their way to the Dougal River mine site, 70 kilometres northwest of Cloncurry. The Dougal River predominantly produces zinc concentrate with byproducts including lead and silver. It's an underground mine wholly owned by MMG Limited. The mine employs about 500 people and contractors in a mix of fly-in, fly-out and local residents. A child's body has been recovered in New Zealand's North Island, taking the death toll from Cyclone Gabrielle to 4. Police say they believe the child was caught in rising floodwaters yesterday in the Hawke's Bay area. Much of the island has been battered by heavy downpours and gale force winds, causing severe flooding and landslips. An airbase manager in Hawke's Bay, John Hayes, says rescue crews have been stretched to their limit.
So the last 24 hours has been pretty busy. Obviously yesterday was a major rescue effort, recovering literally hundreds of people off roofs around the Hawke's Bay area.
The Disability Royal Commission has heard a major disability service provider has improved its training since the Commission heard evidence about abuse and failings at a day program. Today, Chief Executive at Ford, Joanne Toohey, was questioned about what had changed at the organisation. Ms Toohey was not CEO at the time the abuse and failings are alleged to have happened. She told the Royal Commission Ford has upgraded its training and information management and has created a new safeguard team.
The organisation now is using that internal central team, particularly around practice leadership, safeguarding and behaviour support. They're using that team for advice a lot now, which is great because that's what we wanted to happen with that team.
The latest data from the Bureau of Statistics shows an acceleration in parents leaving the public school system for the private sector. Here's National Education reporter Connor Duffy.
The 2022 ABS Schools data shows that a record number of Australian students are now educated at private schools. More than 1.4 million Australian students, or 35.6% of the student population, are now in the independent or Catholic systems. Overall, public school enrolments fell by 0.6% last year, despite cost of living pressures and rising interest rates. Private school enrolments haven't grown this quickly since 2009.
Japan says it will review the use of weapons to bring down spy balloons after revealing 3 intrusions into Japanese airspace over recent years. North Asia correspondent James Oaten reports.
The Japanese government says after reanalysing past cases of unidentified flying objects, it now strongly suspects 3 Chinese balloons flew over Japan in 2019, 2020 and 2021. The government's called on China to verify the facts and ensure it doesn't happen again. Japan's military can only use force for self-defence or emergency evacuations, but the Ministry of Defence says that's being reviewed. It comes after the US shot down a Chinese balloon earlier this month and 3 other high-altitude objects. James Oaten, ABC News, Tokyo.
US air safety officials have launched an investigation into why a Boeing jet unexpectedly lost altitude and nearly plunged into the Pacific Ocean. The United Airlines flight had taken off from Maui in Hawaii in December when it suddenly plummeted 400 metres. It then stabilised at just 230 metres and went on to land safely in San Francisco. The board tasked with investigating plane crashes will release a report on the incident in 3 weeks' time. In sport, Toby Green has been announced as the sole captain for the GWS Giants for the upcoming AFL season. The 29-year-old was part of a three-man captaincy group last season. Green has had some controversial on-field moments in his decorated career and says he's had to learn a lot to be elevated into the captaincy.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't linear from day one. I've had a lot of learnings along the journey, and had a few stuff-ups as well, and learn a lot more from them than what you do otherwise.
A shower or two on the north coast this afternoon, fine and mostly sunny elsewhere, partly cloudy in Sydney, sunny tomorrow, 28. It's 4:05.
You're listening to Drive with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
G'day, Richard Glover with you on ABC Radio Sydney. Today, low no longer. Philip Lowe defends the Reserve's interest rate rises and says there may be more to come. Also today, online gambling has traditionally sold itself as a man's world.
This is a man's world. But it would be nothing without a woman or a gal.
Now it's targeting new female customers. So how's it doing it and will it work? And on midweek conference... You're talking about how complicated the financial rules are, things like the way the superannuation system and the pension system and the tax system all kind of operate together, and just how difficult it is. Actually, Mary puts it well. I have no argument with the rules, she says. The problem is knowing what the rules are so you can follow them. For instance, I was retired, had an excellent financial planner. He set up my superannuation, but then he retired. I tried to clarify with Centrelink, possible part pension, but kept getting conflicting advice, so I decided to email Noel Whittaker. He's a guy I mentioned who writes the column in the Herald. He kindly and promptly provided the answers to my questions. Thank God for him, because the Centrelink staff were as confused as I was. Thanks to that Wednesday column, I applied for a Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, says another listener. It took a whole day to fill in the application form with various documents. And then I had to find more documents from my super fund, which I was then told Centrelink already had. I think it's a deliberate policy to discourage people from getting what is their right to have. So hard to get advice. So few financial advisors now. They're dropping like flies, basically, because of the new laws, and they're charging a hell of a lot of money if you can get one to see you. That's the problem we discussed with Peter Martin. One little idea, actually. This is from Greg he sent it to me on Twitter. He says, I'm following the financial advice segment. I'm reminded of Nick Bruning's segment on Nightlife. He's part of the Certified Independent Financial Advisors Association. That's a valuable resource for listeners. So yes, it's great that Nightlife does that. Ring in. Nick might be able to help you with your problem, or you can write into the Herald, and Noel might be able to help you with it. But really, should we be necessarily relying on newspaper advice columns and radio advice columns with these basic questions? Couldn't either the system be easier or the ability to get advice be somehow streamlined? It's currently 4:08 here on ABC Radio Sydney. When you think about gambling ads targeting young people, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I guess it's a narrator with a blokey voice who uses the word lads and talks about having a pint and a punt with your mates. Well, online gambling companies are now trying to target young women to maximise their client base. This is according to researchers, and they're going about it in new ways. For example, there's this TikTok, which was posted in the lead up to the Super Bowl.
All right, now for the only Super Bowl bet that actually matters, what song do we think the Queen is going to play first? Not going to lie, I genuinely couldn't care less about football, but I do love a good Super Bowl party and a good halftime show. However, this year I'm going to do something to make it a little bit more exciting. I'm going to be betting on the game through Bodog. Bodog has made it so easy to figure out how to bet, and I'm feeling pretty confident that I might actually cash in this year. Even if you don't care at all about sports, they're actually going to be opening markets to bet on Rihanna. Plus, you bring out ASAP, odds on the first song, and I just think that makes game day 100 times better. Check out the website and good luck.
Okay, if you don't want to bet on football, what about on what song Rihanna is going to sing? That's a TikTok posted on the platform by creator Marina Santa Rosa, promoting a US gambling company. Dr. Simone McCarthy is from the Institute for Health Transformation at Deakin University and joins us on Drive. Simone, good afternoon.
Hi, Richard.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
This is one tiny sign, but among a lot of others, that just in the way people might remember during, when cigarettes were so common, there was a real move to suddenly start selling cigarettes to women, and there were women's brands and brands that were, Virginia Slims was targeted to feminist women even. This seems like a similar moment.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Tobacco, when these companies saturated the male customer base, they started designing female-specific products and advertising heavily featuring women, which is exactly the same strategy that the gambling industry is using, designing these betting markets in line with women's interests. And this is a new warning that they are coming after a new customer base.
I thought gambling ads were banned, I don't know about America, but here anyway, were banned on places like TikTok.
Yeah, so despite TikTok's Australian ad policy prohibiting ads sponsored by gambling companies, an Australian sports betting company recently received permission to run a series of ads on TikTok. And these appeared around the same time as the Spring Racing Carnival. And they've just popped up again more recently, advertising these novelty betting markets, which allow you to bet on things like reality TV, global events, and award shows. Really things that align with what women are interested in, appealing to that market that might not be interested in betting on sport.
Okay, let's listen to an example of the game. Again, it's a TikTok on the Sportsbet platform by a Sydney-based influencer.
Okay, apparently this is jockey called J-Mac. Yeah, J-Mac. And he is apparently the best of the best, according to the Sportsbet app, and he's going to be wearing blue. So I thought, why don't we do a little matchy match and be front of mind? When guys see us, they'll be like, oh my God, picked a winner. Oh, fascinators are just so expensive. Do people even wear them anymore?
Yeah, so fascinators might be the subject of a speciality bet. So is there any sign that it's working? The market is still probably mostly a male market, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. We know from the data that participation rates for women are roughly the same as men, about 70%. Of women engaging in gambling at least once a year. And recent prevalence data shows that it's about 2% of women betting on sport. But in our research, we've talked to lots of young women over the last couple of years who are increasingly engaging in betting. And this is only growing as gambling becomes more normalised for women. So they're definitely gambling with their friends around times like the AFL or NRL Grand Final, betting with their boyfriends as a way to do something together and connect, so that it's really normalised among this kind of next generation of young people, both women and men.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see whether this novelty betting will be the gateway for them, so that they might bet on who's going to win Australian Idol, but then the next thing is they'll start betting on the more conventional sports betting and horses and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. This advertising really prompts women to sign up to a betting account, to be able to bet on something like the Bachelor finale, something they feel confident in. But what happens below the line is the gambling company is able to send them text messages and emails to nudge women to engage in gambling more regularly. And this might make it seem quite normal to gamble, therefore creating a whole new customer base for the gambling industry.
Okay, in other words, once you've made one single bet, maybe on something big in your mind, like the Australian Idol grand finale, you might be thinking this is a thing you're going to do once a year, but they've got your details there and they're going to be nudging you.
Yeah, and there's also a range of different gambling environments that young women are attending as well. So as well as seeing the advertising on things like social media, it's also quite normal for women to attend horse racing events. They're attracted to the glamour and the dressing up of these events. And women in our research say that when they attend gambling environments, they feel a pressure to gamble in order to fit in with their social group.
It's interesting too. I mean, the two examples I played were both from TikTok, and they were both influencers, one American and one Australian. It's again this sort of shadow world, isn't it? Where I suppose it's pretty obvious it's a straight ad, but it's often couched in very casual language, often around jokey language, almost as if it's sending up the world of gambling, even while it's being an ad.
Yeah, and despite them being gambling ads, these TikToks look exactly like every other TikTok. I'm a young woman who engages on TikTok, and the TikToks we see look exactly the same as these ads. So it may be normalising gambling as an ordinary activity for young women to engage in, which is really where the concern lies.
Yeah, well, they certainly had a lot of success with cigarettes and Virginia Slims and all of that, which seems so bizarre all these years on. I was looking at them the other day, the ad for Virginia Slims, and it's all about, if you want to be a tough, forceful woman, face down the patriarchy almost, you'll smoke this, cancer-causing product. And again, it's this selling of something which is so destructive. But sold as if it's some sort of way of making friends with your, as you say, your boyfriend.